Hey friends, welcome back to another episode of Space for Life. Today I'm solo. In the recent weeks we've had some incredible episodes. If you haven't had a chance to go back and listen to some of those are just great episodes. We had Michelle Rahal, who wrote Are You Listening? And it was a phenomenal story and thought process about how she has come to be a real listener of God. We've had Emily DuBose, who told the story of Lighthouse RVA, Tracy Gates, author of A Few Kind Words, who took on the daunting task of writing 365 letters, a letter a day to someone, and her amazing experiences throughout that process. And we even had my wife, Wheezy, who talked about her deep practice of journaling over now many decades. And we had a phenomenal conversation about the benefits and the joys of journaling. So there's some great episodes for you to listen to. And we've got some incredible episodes coming up. Next week, one of the greatest interviews I think that I've had over these years, interview with a dear friend of mine, Elaine Metcalf, and her story over many decades that includes time in Richmond, a long period of time in East Asia, and her deep battle now as she battles stage 4 cancer. We're going to be having a great conversation with Sean Boyer coming up soon, who many of you know here in the Richmond area. And then a brand new challenge. I'm going to do a multi-part series on marriage and have some phenomenal guests lined up for that. And I'd love your help on this. If you're interested in this topic, which is really going to be centered around how do we love another person well. But if you're interested in any particular aspect of this process, please email me with thoughts, questions, suggestions that you might have for the series. You can email me at tommy@tommythompson.org. Real easy, tommy@tommythompson.org. And I'm looking forward to sharing some great guests on this and a deep dive over many weeks into the subject of how we marry well, how we live with someone over decades and grow deeply in the process of marriage. So I think that's going to be a fun series coming up soon. This week, I want to introduce the subject of expanding your comfort zone. And comfort zones are something that are talked about a lot these days. You can see all sorts of different pictures and illustrations about the importance of getting outside of your comfort zone. And there's a lot of truth to that, but I want to give a little bit of a new twist to this idea of getting outside of your comfort zones. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about 1, a different way of looking at your comfort zones. 2, how do we go about expanding our comfort zones? How do we actually do this in practice? 3, a few examples of people just like you and me, everyday people who have made a practice of getting outside of their comfort zones. 4, what does God think about comfort zones? Is this in reality just a self-improvement hack, or is God in this process of getting outside of our comfort zones? And 5, I'm going to just list 10 examples, practical everyday examples of how you and I can begin to get outside of our comfort zones. So we have a lot to cover in this episode, and hopefully it will be something that will hit home for you and be practical and be something that you can do right now. So as we get into this idea of expanding our comfort zones, how do we begin to think of this? And I want to put a little bit of an analogy. It's not a perfect one out there, but hopefully it will get at this idea of why it's so important to expand our comfort zones. So I want you to imagine a dartboard. And if you think about a dartboard is comprised of a bunch of different concentric circles that start big on the outside and go all the way in, and they narrow in to a bullseye. And with a dartboard, the aim is to get to that bullseye, to find that small little circle. For this analogy, I want to look at it from the opposite angle, that many people today are living with a very tiny comfort zone, a bullseye, and they operate just within that bullseye. And anything outside of that is scary territory. And then some people have learned to expand that comfort zone. They've learned to operate almost within the full breadth of that dartboard out there. And they are enjoying the breadth of a full life, an abundant life, a challenging life, an exciting life, an adventurous life. And so for the person who has that small comfort zone, each step of stepping outside, and as you step outside of that comfort zone, you begin to just push the boundaries a little bit more and more. You begin to experience more and more of life. And as we do that, we experience what life is meant to be, as opposed to living in that careful, tight little area of a comfort zone. So how do we go about expanding our comfort zone? I want to suggest that there are several different steps to this. The first is realize that we all have multiple comfort zones that we operate within. Some of the comfort zones in our life are broad and totally enjoyable, and some of them are narrow and constricting and filled with fear. So the comfort zones that we operate in, we have social comfort zones. For some people, those comfort zones are wide and fun and engaging and full of joy. For some, those social comfort zones are fearful and create anxiety for us. We have emotional comfort zones. We have experiential comfort zones. People who don't want to travel or don't want to try new things because, frankly, why get outside of your comfort zone? We have financial comfort zones that are comfortable to us. We have physical comfort zones. We even have spiritual comfort zones. And each one of these are either narrowing and fear-inducing in terms of how we operate in those areas, or they're life-giving and joy-producing for us. So realize within your own life, you might even just list out those areas: social, emotional, experiential, financial, physical, and spiritual, and just do a little self-assessment. You know, how big is your comfort zone in each one of those areas? From there, identify that narrow one, that when you begin to think of that comfort zone, that narrow little bullseye in the dartboard is holding you back. You know, it might be, for instance, financial frugality. We're so frugal that we're missing out on so many things because we're afraid of spending money. We don't want to. We want to save every penny. We're afraid of running out. We're afraid of what finances mean to us. It could be the social area where our introversion is holding us back from incredible experiences with others and incredible relationships that we might have. Or even our extroversion might be holding us back from the joy of being with yourself and the joy of quiet and solitude with God. It could be the physical area where we're just not taking care of our bodies. And if we could learn to move outside and risk and push ourselves physically, we could expand the possibilities of our life so much. Each one of these areas, but find that area that is holding you back the most. And let's target that area for expanding your comfort zone. And I think what you're going to find as you target your weakest area is that as you begin to expand that comfort zone, you're going to begin to see all of the other comfort zones, all of the other areas of your life expand also. And that's one of the huge benefits of expanding our comfort zones, is that we don't operate in these little silos, that these areas of our comfort zones, they overlap with one another. And as we affect and expand one area, we begin to expand the other areas. And the opposite is also true. If we begin the narrowing process, which is also something that tends to happen with age, as we begin to narrow our comfort zones, we begin to narrow the possibilities and the joy and the excitement and the adventures that I think life is meant to have. And so this idea of dealing with our comfort zones is critical to our overall well-being in life. So as you do this, define what that narrow comfort zone looks like. Describe how it feels. What are the specifics that define that comfort zone, whether it's your social comfort zone, a physical comfort zone, a financial comfort zone? Describe it in as much detail as you can. What's it holding you back from? How would your life look like if you could expand that comfort zone? And then as you do that, also acknowledge the good sides of that comfort zone. Because our comfort zones have benefits to them. They're places that we can rest, that we can feel secure. So think about the good sides of that. And then begin to imagine, begin to dream about, if you can, what it would look like if you could expand outside of that comfort zone. Now, as you've created this picture, now dip your toe outside of the comfort zone. If you're beginning to think about this, what I want you to do is to think of one small step that is dipping your toe outside of the comfort zone. I remember when I was growing up and we'd go to the pool, maybe at the beginning point in the summer, and the first thing that I would always do is I would go over to the side of the pool and I would just dip my toe in to figure out whether it was going to be freezing cold or whether the pool was going to be warm. And once I'd done that, I then knew, okay, I can go ahead and get in the water. So that's the process that we begin with. We begin to take baby steps outside of your comfort zone. What is one small step that perhaps is a little bit uncomfortable, but you can tolerate it to get outside of your comfort zone? Whether it's social, financial, physical, experiential, what's something that you can do that can give you a taste of, you know what? It's going to be okay. It's going to be okay getting outside of my comfort zone. We need to convince ourselves that the world will not fall apart when we get outside of our comfort zone, that we will survive outside of our comfort zone. Now, come back in. You've dipped your toe outside. Come back in and go, okay, I rest. I'm back in my comfort zone. It's okay. And then we begin that dance, stepping outside of our comfort zone and then coming back to where it's safe and secure. Stepping a little further outside, coming back to where it's safe and secure. And then notice how that getting outside of your comfort zone all of a sudden, this first step, this first baby step that felt so uncomfortable at first is now more comfortable. Let me give an analogy that I tried myself. One of those comfort zones that we could experience on the physical side is taking a cold plunge, getting in extremely cold weather. Now, it's so funny, as I've talked about this with many friends, so many of them, their first reaction is, oh, I could never do that. I could never get into a freezing bath. And so I thought for myself, well, that doesn't sound too exciting for me. I just want to give it a try. So the first time I did it, I filled a bathtub with nothing but pure cold water. I took the temperature of it. The water was in the 50s, so not frigid, but really, really cold. And I thought, okay, I'm just going to get in this cold water. And so I stood in it, and it was up to about my calves. And I thought, this is impossible. It was so cold. It felt burning. It was so cold. And so I stood in it for about 30 seconds. I thought, okay, I'm going to get down onto my knees. And so I got down onto my knees, and I lasted for maybe 1 minute. And then I had to get out. I thought, this is horrible. But the next day, I got back in, and I did the same thing. And then finally, about the third or fourth day, I got in and I was able to sit in the water. And I survived it. After about a week or two, I began to lie down in that freezing cold bathtub. And I went, okay, I can do this. And then finally, I got in all the way up to my neck. And by that time, I was now down in the water for 4 to 5 minutes. And it really wasn't all that bad. I never really enjoyed it, but it wasn't all that bad. All of a sudden, my comfort zone had expanded. So then fast forward a few weeks, and I happened to play in a golf tournament. And they called it the Shamrock Tournament. It was in early March in West Virginia, where the temperature was about 40 degrees with about a 20-mile-an-hour wind. And about 25 people braved the weather out there. And it was actually a very cool experience because I had become so acclimated to being cold that I walked out. I didn't even have that, heavy of clothes on. And I was totally comfortable outside. Everybody else had layers and layers on, was complaining about the weather. They couldn't swing the golf club because they were so cold. For me, it wasn't that big a deal. I actually went out and won the golf tournament. And I give all of the credit to my cold baths because when it came down to it, I was completely comfortable in the expanded comfort zone of being cold. And so that's just a crazy little example on my part of dipping my toe in, literally dipping my toe into the cold weather and into the cold water, and then eventually getting in all the way to my neck and sitting there for 5 minutes. And so many people have found actually tremendous physical benefits out of getting in and cold water immersion. They say it actually increases your longevity to do this. So just an example of that. So as you begin to think of this, use that analogy and think of what's that thing that you tend to think, I could never do that. And then just dip your toe in and get a little further and further in. Don't dive in, dip your toe in, get a little comfortable with it, take the next step, then take the further step, and all of a sudden you'll realize your comfort zone has been expanded. So who are some practical examples of people who have expanded their comfort zone? You know, one of the things that I realized as I was preparing for this episode is, without even noticing it, the guests that I've had on this podcast, Space for Life, are people who have regularly expanded their comfort zone. They've tested the waters. They've gotten outside. They've done something that they didn't think they could do. And in stepping outside of their comfort zone, they found incredible life, incredible excitement and adventure. They found the best of life to be contained at what was initially outside of their comfort zone. And as they expanded that comfort zone, they began to have the confidence that I can do more than I ever thought I could. And so one example, and you might go back and look at some of these episodes, I had on about a year ago, Ruth McKinney, who was just, as she would probably describe it, just an ordinary person doing an ordinary thing. And an uncle challenged her and asked her the question. He said, ask God to give you a vision that's beyond your resources, beyond your financial means, your personal capital, your education, and step into that challenge. And so Ruth was challenged to get outside of her comfort zone. As a result, she wrote the book Hungry for Home, that has taken her to places that she could have never imagined, that has challenged her to places that she never thought. She thought, I would never write a book. And God has taken her to brand new places. I think of Kristen Harris in one of the most powerful episodes I can remember, interviewing her as she battled in the depths of stage 4 breast cancer and was given the vision of developing cancer retreat centers, places that people battling cancers, caregivers and people actually battling the cancer could go to find comfort. They could find support through that. And she described with a glow on her face that was just amazing the joy and purpose that she's found in the midst of the hardest season in her life, as she stepped outside of a place she couldn't even imagine and has created good and support for so many people. I think of Emily DuBose starting Lighthouse RVA. I think of Tracy Gates, who I mentioned earlier, who took on the daunting task of, I'm going to handwrite a letter a day for 365 days. And the amazing encounters that she experienced as she did this. And then I even think of just a week ago interviewing my wife, Weezy, and the practice of journaling that began decades ago when a couple of friends said the benefits that they were getting out of journaling. And she thought, well, I want to try that. And it was incredibly uncomfortable. And it wasn't easy for her to begin with. And now, 25 years later, it's one of the richest experiences that she has every day of her life. And so I think I could go down the list of almost everybody that we've had on this podcast, and each one of them, including myself, had the amazing experience of stepping outside of their comfort zone. This podcast began with stepping outside of my comfort zone, of sitting behind a camera, sitting behind a microphone, and just jumping out and saying, I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know where this is going, but I think there's life to be found in doing this. So I want to encourage you, go back, listen to some episodes, realize the life and joy that's been found in so many people when they took the chance, when they took the risk of stepping outside of their comfort zone. So when it comes down to it, is this idea of stepping outside of the comfort zone just another one of those self-improvement hacks? Or is God, in one sense, in this process of stepping outside of our comfort zone? When I thought about this, when I went to the Bible and began to look at the different people in the Bible, I realized that the Bible is filled with examples of people who are called in faith outside of their comfort zones. You could go all the way back to Abraham. Abraham had settled, it uses that word settled, with his family in Haran for a generation. And then right after his dad died, God called him to go to a place that I will show you. What a scary call. Pick up you and your family, all your cattle, all of your possessions, and just go. Go to a place I will show you. God didn't tell him where he was sending him. He just said, I am calling you in faith to step outside of your comfort zone and go in faith, and I'll be there. And so Abraham stepped out from Haran with all of his family and began a life journey to the promised land, to the land of life, to the land of milk and honey, to the land of adventure, to the land of faith. Then you think of Moses. Moses was minding his business, herding sheep, and God met him at a burning bush and said, I want you to go back to Egypt, and I want you to confront Pharaoh, to confront the most powerful person in the world and tell him to let the Israelites go, to let his entire slave population go and leave Egypt. How daunting is that? Moses was called. He didn't think he could speak. He said, Lord, I can't speak in front of people. God said, I'll give you the words. And so God called Moses way out of his comfort zone to go back to Egypt and confront Pharaoh. Elijah was called to Mount Carmel to face down 100 prophets of Baal in the name of God. The disciples of Jesus were called after they'd spent a relatively short time with Jesus to go out 2 by 2 to the neighboring towns and in the name of Jesus to cast out demons and to heal people. Can you imagine what that must have been like to go out and to claim in Jesus' name, not knowing whether it would work or not, that this person was healed? And they went out and they found that God gave them the power to do this, way outside of their comfort zone. And then the example I love to think about is the Apostle Paul. In the book of Philippians, Paul wrote from prison. He said, I've learned the secret of being content. I can handle any situation, whether I'm hungry, whether I'm filled. I can handle the situation of whether I have plenty or whether I have nothing. And he said, I can do all things through Christ who strengthened me. Paul's comfort zone was the entire dartboard. There was nothing that could be thrown at him that was outside of his comfort zone. In fact, even when presented with the real possibility that eventually ended up being true of dying for his faith, he said, you know, I'm kind of torn. I could die and go be with Jesus, or I could stay here. Either one, I'm fine. There was nothing outside of the comfort zone for Paul. And I think that's the place that God would have us, where wherever he calls us, whatever he asks us to do, the full abundance of life is there for us if we will only learn to trust and step outside of our comfort zone and believe that there's life to be found outside of that. So now I promised 10 examples of busting outside of our comfort zone. These are intended to just be possibilities that you could try. And so I want to consider them as baby steps. They will obviously not apply to everybody because we all have different comfort zones. So I'll start off with the social area. If you're an introvert, consider inviting a new friend to lunch just to get to know that person. No agenda. That might be outside your comfort zone. If you're an extrovert, that's probably pretty comfortable. But if you're an introvert, step outside that comfort zone. Call a friend, invite them out to lunch just to get to know them. If you're an extrovert, your comfort zone might be spent by spending a half day by yourself without distractions to just imagine and dream about the year ahead. Here's a couple of physical steps outside your comfort zone. Try what I did. Take a cold plunge. You might think, I could never do this. You might not want to do it, and that's fine. But realize that you can do this. And perhaps step outside your comfort zone and get in a really, really cold bath. You might step outside your comfort zone physically, and you might fast for a day. Think, I can't go for a day without eating. Well, you can. Try that. Financial comfort zones. Call a financial advisor to get help with your finances. So many people are stuck, needing help, but afraid to call. So consider, ask a friend who's a financial advisor that you could trust and get the process started of expanding outside your comfort zone. Here's a sixth one. Find someone in need and give them what they need. Make it a little bit uncomfortable. Take $100 and find someone who you could bless with that $100 and give it away. That might feel really uncomfortable to you, but find the joy of giving. Give away $100. Experiential. Try something that you're no good at. A few years back, I had what ended up being kind of a funny experience with that. I went and participated in a hot yoga class. Now, one of the things that's very uncomfortable for me is dancing. So the combination of going to a hot yoga class and getting in positions that my body won't get into with mostly a bunch of ladies was incredibly uncomfortable. I knew for a fact that I was going to be the very worst in the entire class. Surprisingly, not. I was the very worst in the entire class. But I came out of it. It wasn't that bad. And I realized I could do that. Try something experientially that you're not good at. And just realize it's not the end of the world to be the worst at something. Try something or go somewhere that intimidates you a little. This summer I had one of those get outside of your comfort zone experiences when for my 65th birthday, I jumped out of an airplane. It was a bit daunting and scary, but it was an exhilarating experience. And I'm so glad that I did it. Probably won't do it again, but I'm so glad that I did it. So here's one in the spiritual area, an experience that maybe you haven't tried. Try praying in silence for 10 minutes. Try doing nothing but listening to God in silence for 10 minutes. Might feel a little bit uncomfortable, but see if somewhere, somehow, you might be able to hear the small whisper of God. Finally, this is number 10, an emotional, relational one. Step outside of your comfort zone and have that hard conversation that you've been procrastinating on for so long. So there are all sorts of examples, and hopefully if you've been listening to this, there's one or two that are worth your trying. There's one or two experiences of getting outside of your comfort zone that you need to step into today. And as you step into this experience of getting outside of your comfort zone, you'll first realize, I can survive this. Secondly, you'll begin to realize that life is to be found outside of the comfort zone. And third, you'll begin to experience that as you begin to take that weakest area and step outside of your comfort zone, all of the other areas begin to expand. So Jesus said something, John 10:10. He said, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. I have come that you might have life and have it abundantly. And that life is to be found as we trust Him and step outside of the boat, outside of our comfort zone, and realize that He will meet us there. So thanks so much for listening. I hope this will provide just a challenge for you. That will be a life-giving challenge. Have a great day.